Hello, I just wanted to demonstrate the potential for generating income from this particular set of technologies. On the left, we have a window that is open, which belongs to, well, it's open on the Times, but for example, I could just as easily click to another website. And on the right hand side, I've got a window open which will allow me to dictate whatever it is that I happen to be talking about for the benefit of anybody who wants a transcript. So we can go into the technical reasons why everything's been set up like this on another occasion. For now, let us have a look at this. Okay, so this is quite an interesting story. I mean, there's a bunch of interesting stories here. So on the top left, Britain and EU poised to announce Christmas Eve Brexit deal. So they'll just announce the Brexit deal and say, oh, there you go. But of course, who knows if the Brexit deal will be a good one. The point is it will be rushed and there will be no scrutiny. But that was always going to be the case. Management, what business learnt in the time of coronavirus? Yeah, so I forgot to say it's Christmas Eve at the moment. And that is a good time for stories reviewing the year. I'm just going to highlight the audio capture. UK faces days of disruption at English Channel crossing. Britain struggles to return lorry drivers to France after Paris reopens the border. So let me just say that again. UK faces days of disruption at English Channel crossing. UK faces days of disruption. UK faces days of disruption at the English Channel crossing. Britain struggles to return lorry drivers to France after Paris reopens the border. So it's interesting the tone that's used in these headlines and in the blurbs. When I say blurb, I mean the little bit of writing below the headline that's supposed to summarize everything. It's interesting because the headlines are getting longer and the blurbs are getting shorter. Trump vetoes $740 billion defense bill to set up fresh clash with Congress. I love it. So Trump is saying that's too much money spent on military. Move could see lawmakers override a veto from the president for the first time. Alibaba. I like the look of this one. Beijing launches antitrust investigation into Alibaba. Probe into China's biggest tech group is one of the first of its kind for country's internet sector. It's fascinating, isn't it, that China are launching antitrust investigations when, I mean, I suppose, yeah, it might look bad for them to just close the company down or split it up, and they would have to go about some process in order to do it, and maybe that's what they're going to do. Do what the Americans should have done to Google ages ago. It'd be interesting to know what the arguments are in China, because in America, what they say is, why would we break up Google or Facebook when these are champions in the face of international competition, i.e., from China? Next, Donald Trump's pardoning spree tests boundaries of authority. We're going to have to come back to that one because it's fascinating, and that is something that's going to be remembered for hundreds of years. Christmas streaming battle goes dark. Lack of ratings data makes it hard to distinguish a flop from a hit, and for producers to strike deals. Patients are arriving too late. Italy's cancer sufferers count cost of COVID. Vital treatment is being held up as the crisis consumes health service resources. Okay. As you can see, the recording, the dictation technology isn't perfect. I am speaking not too far away from the microphone. Hopefully it's all been picked up, but you can see that there are mistakes made, and that's fine because most of it has been captured, and one could cast one's eye over the text and detect errors, and highlight them and potentially correct them. It's even possible to make the video and then send the text to learners and ask them to correct the text. I could say, look, here it is. I want you to listen, watch, highlight the problems, and correct them, which is literally just a dictation correction exercise. But you never know. It could do people a lot of good because they have to employ the skills necessary in order to improve their communication, i.e., they have to definitely listen, they have to definitely read, and they have to definitely rewrite. And if they then want to talk to me about it, that would cap it all off because they would be summarizing orally by speaking what they had learned when listening to the recording, reading the article, and correcting the dictation technology's mistakes, which would be not simply about reading the article, but also about understanding the way in which I'm speaking and ensuring that they're getting exactly the same words as I'm saying to the point where they're doing it better than the technology. I think that's a brilliant opportunity and one which could lead to people really improving their communication skills, full stop. And I can see mistakes in the technology. So there's a way of turning everything into your strength. Let's just go into the next part. I suppose another thing. I suppose another thing that I could do is to get the text in a more boring format, like in a text file, because that way I'd be able to fit more on the screen and it would be easier to navigate. But, having the genuine article in front of us is probably going to help motivate learners because then they can see the shape of the headline, the shape of the picture, how many comments are there. As we can see, it says 191, and that will give them the feel of the actual website, which will come in useful in the future because ultimately they won't be learning English with me anymore. They will be just going straight into the website and getting on with it because they won't have the time to improve their vocab. They'll be too busy at work. And hopefully by then they'll have built in different ways of being able to perform similar exercises, but whilst on the job. Donald Trump's pardoning spree tests boundaries of authority. Historians say US President is notable for granting clemency to a number of political allies. That's such a friendly way of calling him corrupt. During the deliberations over whether to ratify the US Constitution in 1788, George Mason, the Virginian politician and scholar, warned against one particular institution, the right of a president to pardon people. Sorry, one particular inclusion, the right of a president to pardon people. He may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself, Mason said. It may happen at some future day that he will establish a monarchy and destroy the republic. Donald Trump this week once more tested the boundaries of what voters will tolerate when it comes to presidential clemency, issuing pardons to 15 people on Tuesday and a further 26 on Wednesday. They included 2 Republican politicians, 4 former private security contractors convicted of being involved in the deaths of Iraqi civilians, 4 people convicted of crimes connected to the Mueller investigation, and the president's ties to Russia, and the father of Mr. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Mr. Trump is hardly the first president to use his pardoning authority controversially, but historians say the outgoing president has acted unusually in how often he has used the power to benefit his own allies. Presidents tend to use the power of pardon to help bring the country together, to correct a miscarriage of justice, or where there are extenuating circumstances, such as subsequent good behavior, said Barbara Perry, a presidential historian at University of Virginia. The extenuating circumstances is not supposed to be for the president themselves. It is just not supposed to be that this person is on their side, she added. Among those whom Mr. Trump pardoned this week were Roger Stone, the veteran political operative convicted of lying to Congress, obstruction, and witness tampering to protect Mr. Trump in the Mueller investigation. The president had already last month commuted Mr. Stone's sentence. Mr. Trump pardoned Paul Manafort, his former campaign manager, George Papadopoulos, a former low-level campaign advisor, and Alex van der Zwaan, a former lawyer. Mr. Papadopoulos was convicted of making false statements, whilst Mr. van der Zwaan lied to investigators about his contacts with Rick Gates, a former senior advisor to Mr. Trump. Mr. Manafort's convictions for financial fraud related to income from his political consulting work in Ukraine. Last month, the president also issued a pardon to Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, who admitted to lying about contacts with a Russian diplomat. Hold on a second. It's very, very interesting the way in which they just spoke about Roger Stone, Ukraine, Russian diplomats and pardoning, and they never mentioned WikiLeaks. Because Julian Assange needs to be pardoned very soon by the president. If not, he's going to be sent to America. Because it's unlikely that Joe Biden, the new president, is going to pardon Julian Assange. As with a lot of other controversies during Donald Trump's time in office, what is unusual here is the sheer scale. Tim Naftali, Associate Professor of History at New York University. Constitutional experts on Wednesday said Mr. Trump was operating within his legal powers. The Constitution gives the President the authority to grant reprieves for offences against the US, though not for state crimes or those for which the offender could be impeached by Congress. So that means that he can't pardon himself. Mr. Trump has the sole power to issue a federal pardon, although guidelines say it is ordinarily granted if a person accepts responsibility for a crime and has shown good behavior for a significant period after conviction. Pardons have proved controversial throughout history. Gerald Ford granted an unconditional and preemptive pardon to his predecessor Richard Nixon in an attempt to heal a divided country, although the move imperiled his own political career. Andrew Johnson caused far deeper anger in much of America in 1865 by issuing a blanket pardon for former Confederates. There is also historical precedent for presidents using such powers to help themselves or those close to them. Bill Clinton caused fury when he pardoned both Mark Rich, a fugitive financier, and his own brother on his final day as president. I didn't know that Bill Clinton pardoned his own brother on his final day as president. That's pretty telling. George H.W. Bush pardoned several officials prosecuted for their role in the Iran-Contra scandal, which I believe included drugs coming out of, I can't remember where, but being involved a lot of drug smuggling, as well as the selling of drugs in America. But historians say these remain anomalies and that Mr. Trump stands out as unusual for the frequency with which he has issued pardons that appear to be in his own interest. An analysis by Jack Goldsmith, a professor at Harvard Law School, found that before Wednesday's announcement, more than 90% of those who had been pardoned or whose sentences had been commuted by Mr. Trump had a personal or a political connection to the president. As with a lot of other controversies during Donald Trump's time in office, what is unusual here is the sheer scale, said Tim Naftali, an associate professor of history at New York University. Many expect Mr. Trump to go further in his final weeks in office. The outgoing president has reportedly discussed granting preemptive pardons to his 3 children, as well as Jared Kushner, his son in law, and Rudy Giuliani, his personal lawyer. Some believe he may eventually feel constrained from doing so because of the legal view that a pardon automatically confers guilt. According to a Supreme Court ruling from 1915, a pardon carries an imputation of guilt, and acceptance of a pardon is a confession of it. Ford was said to have carried round a piece of paper in his wallet with those words written on it. More important for Mr. Trump's own future, however, is that by accepting a pardon, his associates then remove their right not to testify at a future trial for fear of implicating themselves. Let me just read that again. More important for Mr. Trump's own future, however, is that by accepting a pardon, his associates then remove their right not to testify at a future trial for fear of implicating themselves. Oh, that's so funny. Because normally they wouldn't testify on the basis that they could get into trouble. But now they can say, well, I've been pardoned, so I can testify against Mr. Trump. So he could say, I forgive you. And they say, well, that's very kind of you, but we will not forgive you. According to an 1895 ruling by the Supreme Court, if the witness has already received a pardon, he can no longer set up his privilege, since he stands with respect to such offence as if it had never been committed. This may make them more likely to appear as a witness in any trial against Mr. Trump himself, legal experts say. There is one final option should Mr. Trump wish to make sure he is not prosecuted once he becomes a private citizen. He could try to pardon himself. No president has attempted this before, and the Constitution does not mention the possibility except to say that no one can be a judge in their own trial. Nixon weighed the option of pardoning himself, but eventually decided not to, following warnings from his own advisers. If Mr. Trump were to try this, there would almost certainly be a legal challenge, one likely to end up in the Supreme Court. Even Nixon never tried this, and that was Nixon. But Donald Trump is different, said Thomas Balchersky, associate professor of history at Eastern Connecticut State University. Anyone who cares about the Constitution and the state of our democracy has cause to be concerned. One of the things I also find interesting about this particular website, the Financial Times, is that with certain things, big ticket items, you could call them, like huge stories like this, they open the comments, and the comments, they come in quick and, well, sharp. There are other stories where they don't allow comments because the content is controversial. People could say things that the FT just doesn't want on its website. It's very interesting, the line that has to be drawn between freedom of speech and, well, people saying things that the business, that's this newspaper business, doesn't want to be displayed on its own website. Let's have a look at a couple of comments. Yet another proof of how low this man is. Let's make sure no one tells him he could fire a nuke. Good riddance, loser. Yeah, yes, of course, because, the point is, at least he didn't press the button. He didn't destroy the world by setting off nuclear bombs. Of course he will pardon himself. He will then go on a social media rant declaring that it is to protect himself from the conspirators. So let me just read that again, because I could have emphasized that differently. Of course he'll pardon himself. He'll then go on a social media rant declaring that it's to protect himself from the conspirators. Clinton, Carter, and Reagan pardoned several hundred each, so a long way to go yet. Up next, Bannon and Gillen. Those Blackwater operatives committed war crimes and should be picked up by another country, like Canada, for example, and tried again. A good number of Trump's pardonees are also implicated in state crimes. The states should go after them and lock them up. Trump himself is a disgrace to the office of president. I hope New York State, DC, and or Florida swoop down on him and his cronies just after noon, January 20th, and lock him up. Interesting, the passion. Amazing to watch the passion in the comment section, which is called apparently in the newspaper industry below the line. And yes, they do monitor it to have a look at opinion and see if anybody says anything interesting and what people find interesting. Honestly, you cannot like Trump, but really, Holder arranges pardon of Rich from Clinton and get appointed to... Well, I'm not going to carry on reading that because it just makes no sense. Meanwhile, the continuing proof of American exceptionalism bedazzles billions. Millions of COVID-19 vaccines are sitting unused in US hospitals and elsewhere a week into the massive inoculation campaign, putting the government's target for 20 million vaccinations this month in doubt. Corn. All 1.9 kilograms of him got pardoned by Trump at Thanksgiving. That completed the list of the irreproachable pardoned. Trump was obviously just kidding about law and order. I love it. So I think corn was the name of the turkey that he pardoned at Thanksgiving. This is hilarious. Despite all the frothy mouth ranting, the blue check marks and their NPC legion have zero power and zero ability to change what Trump is doing. All presidents pardon their cronies. The outrage from this will no doubt be completely absent when their side is in power and Republicans have their turn to holler and mash their keyboards in impotent angst instead. Brilliant use of language from that person. I love the way they said frothy-mouthed. So that's a very telling description of anger. You're so angry that there's foam at your mouth. That's a brilliant description. How can you run an organised crime syndicate if you cannot reward loyalty? The bittersweet irony outlined in the article is that Trump's people will lose their right to remain silent once they accept their pardon. Given that they will have a lot more dirt on them, this will provide a lot of leverage to district attorneys interrogating them on the many, many naughty deeds of Mr. Trump. Merry Christmas, Donald. Maybe it's your last as a free man. Tee-hee-hee. So there you are. I don't know how long this has been recording, but I'm going to stop. Obviously, it would have been better if I had a bit more of an idea what I was going to do, a bit more of a plan, how long I was going to run for. But of course, a lot of that will come out in the watching of this and the, I don't want to say re-watching, but whatever it is that we build from this point on.